I'm not proud of what I'm about to admit, but it's the truth. I didn't realize my career was ending until it was already over. Not when my boss stopped answering my messages. Not when my responsibilities quietly shifted to other people. Not even when HR started scheduling just checking in calls every Friday, the kind where they talk to you like you're already halfway out the door. No, the moment everything snapped into place was when I opened Slack at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday and saw a private channel I was never supposed to see. And inside it, I found my name, my performance, my habits, my job, all discussed like I wasn't a person, just a problem they were trying to engineer out of the building. I wish I could say I handled it well, but the first thing I felt was embarrassment. The second was fear. Only later came anger. I'd worked at that company for almost 4 years, long enough to know the quirks, the politics, who to avoid in the elevator, who kept whiskey in their bottom drawer, long enough to believe, stupidly, that loyalty mattered. My boss, Mark, wasn't the worst manager I'd ever had. He just wasn't much of anything. Passive, vague, always looping back, instead of giving a real answer. But I understood him, or I thought I did. He liked people who worked quietly, who didn't demand credit, who made his life easier. So I made mine smaller. I didn't push back when he took my projects and gave them to newer hires for exposure. I didn't complain when he canceled our 1-1s 12 weeks in a row. I didn't argue when he passed over my promotion because the timing wasn't ideal. I told myself that patience would pay off, that being the reasonable one would matter someday, that it was better to keep the peace. Then things got off. First, it was a task I wasn't copied on, followed by a meeting invite everyone received except me. Then it was the sudden coldness in Mark's tone, like he was bracing for something. A coworker casually asked me, "Are you okay? I heard something about restructuring." I laughed it off. What else could I do? You don't go around confronting people based on hallway whispers. But the feeling stuck with me, that something had shifted, and I was the last one to notice. The night everything cracked open, I stayed late to finish a dashboard that Mark said he urgently needed by morning. I'd been waiting all day for him to clarify a couple of metrics, but he never replied. I figured I'd just do my best, send it over, and fix whatever he didn't like tomorrow. When I reopened Slack, I saw a faint notification icon, not a message, but a channel appearing in the sidebar for a split second before disappearing. A glitch, I thought. Slack did that sometimes. Then it appeared again, and this time it stayed long enough for me to read the title. People Ops Q3 Initiative. Not a channel I recognized. Not one I should have had access to. But when I clicked it, it opened. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. Just a wall of messages, mostly from HR, Lisa, the partner assigned to our department, and Mark. A thread in the middle caught my eye. My name was bolded. The message above it read, "We should finalize the documentation timeline this week. If he pushes back, we'll escalate to a PIP and route it toward voluntary resignation." And then another. "We need a clean narrative. Missed deadlines, miscommunication, team friction. Build the case gradually." I scrolled, and scrolled, and scrolled. They had been talking about me for weeks. Every odd interaction suddenly had context. Every ignored question, every vague comment, every rearranged assignment. They weren't just planning to fire me, they were engineering a trail of manufactured issues, so the firing looked justified. They even discussed which task to give me to maximize the chance of failure. One message said, "He's competent enough that we need pressure points. Pick something cross-functional. He'll drop a detail eventually." It felt like reading autopsy notes for a person who was still alive. On the strangest part, neither of them seemed angry, or frustrated, or even interested. The whole thing read like they were discussing logistics for office furniture disposal. I wasn't a person to them. I was a checkbox on their quarter-end roadmap. My hand shook while I scrolled. My heartbeat was so loud I could hear it in my ears. I kept thinking there had to be some explanation. Maybe this was about someone else with the same name. Maybe this was old. Maybe it was hypothetical. No. But then I reached a message from the day before. Once Ethan is out, we can open the rec for a junior. Budget will stretch further. There it was, plain and unceremonious. I wasn't underperforming. I was expensive. I don't know how long I sat staring at my screen. Long enough for the office lights to shut off automatically. Long enough for my throat to tighten until I could barely swallow. But eventually, without thinking, I reached for my keyboard and hit Shift plus Command plus 4, the Mac shortcut for screenshots. The first capture felt surreal. The second felt wrong, like I was doing something illegal. By the fifth, my hands had stopped shaking. I wasn't planning anything yet. I wasn't thinking ahead. I was just trying to hold on to the truth before they rewrote it. When I finally pushed back from my desk, the building was silent. I closed Slack, grabbed my bag, and walked to the elevator in a daze. My reflection in the brushed metal doors looked older than I remembered. Tired, small, the kind of person you could erase from a team photo and no one would notice. But just before the elevator arrived, a single thought cut through the fog. If they spent weeks preparing for my firing, then maybe I needed to start preparing for something too. And I had no idea just how far this story was going to go. I didn't sleep that night, not even a little. I lay on my couch with my laptop open beside me, the blue glow fading and brightening as Slack notifications from other channels came in. Harmless, irrelevant chatter from a world that didn't know my floor had just dropped out from under me. Every hour or so, I'd open the screenshots again. Not because I doubted what I'd seen, but because my mind refused to accept that the people I'd trusted with my livelihood were discussing me like a defective appliance they needed to return before the warranty expired. Around 3 a.m., after the adrenaline began wearing off, I scrolled all the way to the start of the thread. That's when the real punch landed. This hadn't begun last week, or the week before. The earliest messages mentioning me were from 2.5 months earlier. It started innocently enough. Ethan is probably not a long-term fit, followed by Lisa's neat HR language about exploring options. Then weeks later came another line from Mark. We should consider a gradual phase-out, preferably by Q3 close. I stared at that timestamp until my eyes blurred. Q3 close. That was next month. They'd been planning my exit with more coordination than they used for actual product launches. The more I read, the uglier it became. Not dramatic, not explosive, just cruel in its calmness. They dissected my workload, pointed out places where delays weren't even mine, and twisted them into a pattern. One message chilled me. He's too compliant, won't push back. That'll make it easier. My chest tightened. They didn't pick me because I was the worst employee. They picked me because I was the safest to push out. By sunrise, my fear had calcified into something sharper. I wish I could say it was courage, but it was closer to a cold, vibrating clarity. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a process, deliberate, methodical, designed to leave me with no severance, no recourse, no reference. And if they were willing to go this far quietly, what else were they prepared to do? That question shifted something in me. I'd spent months trying to be someone who didn't cause problems. But there's a moment where trying to be the good employee stops being noble and starts being self-sabotage. The first thing I did that morning was forward the Slack captures to a private, encrypted storage. The second was to start digging through my email archives, old tasks, Jira tickets, meeting recordings, not to use them as weapons, but to remind myself I wasn't the incompetent liability they were painting me as. I found my accolades, my quarterly highlights, even a thank you message from Mark from just 6 months earlier. Couldn't have done it without you. Kind of ironic, considering that somewhere around that same time, he was writing messages like, "We should set him up with a stretch assignment, something we can cite later." That stretch assignment came 2 weeks after that Slack message. A massive cross-team deliverable with vague requirements. 3 dependency teams and a deadline so unrealistic that even the project manager frowned when she gave it to me. At the time, I chalked it up to poor planning. Now I saw it for exactly what it was, the first domino. And when I'd asked Mark for clarity about the metrics, he'd replied with his usual, "Just do your best." The perfect trap. Too little direction to succeed, just enough rope to hang myself with. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the realization that all the strange coincidences made sense now. When Mark told me during my mid-year review that I needed to improve cross-functional communication, I believed him. When he said some coworkers had complained I was hard to align with, I believed that too. I tried harder. I sent more updates. I asked more questions. And every time I did, they collected my efforts like puzzle pieces in a story they were writing, without me. I wasn't failing. I was being positioned. At noon, still operating on no sleep, I texted my friend Daniel, who'd gone through something similar 2 years earlier. He didn't respond for hours, which left me alone with my thoughts. And that's when the irritation began boiling over into anger. How long would I have played along? How long would I have smiled in meetings, thinking everything was fine? How long would I have trusted people who were quite literally mapping out my exit strategy behind a private Slack channel? But when Daniel finally called me back, his voice was calm, much calmer than mine. "Okay," he said after I described everything. "First rule, don't confront them." That threw me. Why not? Because they'll delete things, rewrite things, close ranks. You have proof right now. Don't give them time to make it disappear. So what am I supposed to do? Document everything they say from now on. Every task, every deadline, every meeting. Let them keep walking into their own mess. His confidence irritated me at first. It made the whole thing sound like a chess match I wasn't ready for. But the more he explained, the more I saw the path forming. Stay quiet, stay steady. Let their own system expose them. I didn't feel powerful. I didn't even feel safe. But for the first time since opening that Slack channel, I wasn't drowning. I was observing. The next day at work, everything felt louder. Every whisper in the hallway, every Slack ping, every look from Mark. Suddenly I could see the cracks in his mask, the slight avoidance when he passed my desk, the forced casualness when he asked how the dashboard was going. He didn't know what I knew, not yet, and that ignorance gave me my first sliver of leverage. Around 4 p.m., he messaged me. "Let's touch base tomorrow about bandwidth." Bandwidth, a word he only used when preparing to unload tasks on someone, usually to overwhelm them. It was practically an announcement of their next move. I read the message twice, then archived it. My pulse slowed, not from calm, but from control. They thought they were guiding the narrative, but they were walking straight into documentation I would eventually put in front of the right eyes. That night, for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like prey. They thought I was compliant, predictable, easy to manage, but that was just the beginning. The meeting invite hit my inbox at 9:12 a.m. sharp. Sync with HR plus manager, mandatory. No subject, no agenda. Just the kind of title that tells you the decision isn't up for discussion. My stomach tightened, but I clicked accept immediately. Pretending not to know what was coming was part of the game now, and I played my role well. I spent the rest of the morning working quietly, documenting everything, saving every Slack message, every task request. Mark floated around the office, eyes darting toward me and then away like I was a lit fuse he didn't want to be too close to. HR, meanwhile, walked past twice, each time giving me that polished half-smile people use when they've already decided something about you. When 2 p.m. rolled around, I stepped into the conference room. Mark was already there. HR joined 30 seconds later. They sat across from me like interviewers at the final round of a process I hadn't known I'd applied for. HR began with her soft, even voice. "Thank you for meeting with us, Ethan. We want to discuss some concerns regarding your recent performance." I nodded, keeping my breathing level. "Okay, what concerns?" She exchanged a glance with Mark, who cleared his throat like he'd rehearsed this. There have been delays, issues with communication across teams, and feedback about your ability to manage collaborative tasks. The phrasing was nearly identical to the messages I'd read in the Slack thread. Word for word in some places. It was surreal, watching them read from a script they didn't know I had already stolen. I didn't defend myself, didn't scramble or argue. I just asked, "Could you provide specific examples?" Mark hesitated. That alone told me everything. Then offered some vague references. A missed dependency, a misunderstood deadline, a recurring pattern he struggled to articulate. I wrote everything down, every sentence, every pause. Then HR slid a document across the table, a PIP, Performance Improvement Plan. The text inside was absurd, unrealistic metrics, arbitrary deadlines, goals that would require 16-hour days to meet. The PIP wasn't a chance to improve. It was a runway pointed straight at the exit. I lifted the packet by its edge and flipped through it, slowly page by page. "Did you write this?" I asked. HR smiled like a doctor delivering bad news gently. "This is a collaborative outline." I looked at Mark. "Did you collaborate on it?" His jaw twitched. "We both did." Of course they had. I'd watched them write it in real time weeks earlier. I placed my pen down and spoke as calmly as I could. "I'll need this sent to me electronically, and I'll need all expectations documented clearly in writing." HR opened her mouth to continue the script, but something in my tone froze her. She nodded. "Of course." For a moment, the room felt suspended. Their plan was moving forward exactly as they designed it, but something in the air had shifted just slightly, as if they sensed, in some small animal instinct way, that I wasn't quite where they expected me to be. After the meeting, Mark avoided me completely. HR sent a follow-up email with vague bullet points and a sanitized version of what she'd said aloud. I read it, saved it, and forwarded it to my private folder. Then, step by step, exactly like Daniel advised, I drafted my own email, not to Mark, not to HR. To the head of compliance, a person 3 levels above both of them. The subject line was simple: request for guidance regarding possible policy violations. Inside the email, I wrote clearly and professionally: no emotion, no accusations. Just facts. I had been placed on a PIP. I had concerns regarding its basis. I had found internal communication that suggested premeditation. I had preserved that communication. I wanted to confirm the appropriate procedure for reporting what appeared to be coordinated documentation intended to engineer a termination. I attached the screenshots. Before sending, I read the email twice. My hands weren't shaking anymore. When I hit send, something inside me settled. Not victory, not relief, just alignment. A sense that the ground beneath me had stopped collapsing long enough for me to stand. They thought they were the only ones who knew how to use the system. They never imagined I'd use the system against them. 40 minutes later, I got a reply. It wasn't from the head of compliance. It was from someone even higher, the company's legal operations office. They thanked me for the report. They asked me not to discuss the matter further with my manager or HR while they reviewed the material. They asked for copies of the PIP drafts. They asked if I was comfortable providing additional details in a confidential meeting. My pulse kicked hard, but not from fear, from clarity. They wouldn't have looped in legal if they thought this was nothing. They wouldn't have moved this fast if what I sent wasn't serious. The next morning, Mark got into the office later than usual. HR didn't make eye contact with me. Meetings were rescheduled. Conversations that normally happened in open channels suddenly shifted to private ones. Something was unraveling. I could feel it. At 3 p.m., I got another invite. Discussion, compliance review. This time, when I walked into the room, there were 2 people waiting who weren't part of our department. One introduced herself as Senior HR from corporate. The other introduced himself simply as Greg from legal. Mark wasn't there. Neither was the HR partner who'd written the PIP. I sat down. Greg folded his hands. Ethan, thanks for meeting with us. We've reviewed the documents you sent. I nodded. He continued, voice steady but unmistakably grave. What you provided raises significant concerns. We're conducting a full internal investigation. Effective immediately, decisions about your employment will not involve your direct manager or your local HR partner. A small shock went through me. Unexpected, electric. I wasn't safe. But I wasn't alone anymore either. Then he asked the question that shifted everything. Is there anything else you believe we should be aware of? For the first time since this whole thing started, I allowed myself to exhale. Because yes, there was more. And now there were people in the room who actually wanted to hear it. They thought they'd cornered me. They thought I had no power. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. The investigation didn't explode. It didn't erupt into shouting matches or dramatic confrontations in hallways. Instead, it unfolded the way real corporate disasters do. Quietly, efficiently, with doors closing at unusual hours and conversations happening in conference rooms, whose blinds were never shut until now. I kept my head down and did my job, the part of it they hadn't carved away. Every morning I walked in aware that somewhere above me, behind layers of departments and reporting structures, people I would never meet were reading the same Slack messages that had nearly taken my career apart. Mark avoided me entirely, not just physically, digitally too. No Slack messages, no emails, no comments on my tasks. It was like someone had scrubbed him out of my work environment. HR disappeared in the same way. The partner who'd smiled politely while pushing my PIP across the table now couldn't even hold eye contact when she passed in the hallway. It wasn't guilt. It was fear. The kind of fear people feel when the narrative stops working and the ground shifts under them in ways they can't control. Weeks passed, enough that normalcy slowly tried to creep back in. Coworkers grew curious but didn't ask. A few even started treating me more respectfully, as if they sensed something had changed but couldn't name it. I didn't correct them. I didn't explain anything. I just did the work I still owned and let silence do what silence always does. Reveal people's true nature. Then one morning, a new meeting invite appeared in my inbox. Employment resolution discussion. Corporate HR plus legal. Different names, higher titles, no Mark, no local HR. I knew what it meant. I arrived early, breathing steadily, prepared not for a fight, but for clarity. Inside were 3 people, the senior HR representative, the legal counsel named Greg, and someone I didn't know, a director whose title included words like risk and governance. Important people, the kind who don't attend meetings unless something irreversible has already been decided. They invited me to sit. Their expressions were calm, professional, but unmistakably serious. Ethan, senior HR began, we've completed our review. I nodded once. Based on the evidence you provided and additional information uncovered during the investigation, we have determined that your manager and the involved HR partner violated company policy regarding fair employment practices and performance documentation. Hearing it said aloud felt strange, validating, yes, but also heavier than I expected. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't vindication. It was simply the truth laid flat on the table, where it couldn't be twisted anymore. Greg continued, the company acknowledges that the PIP issued to you was not constructed in good faith and did not meet internal standards. As such, it is considered void. Void. I felt something loosen in my chest, something I'd been holding since the night I opened that Slack channel. Senior HR folded her hands. We understand the trust that was broken. We would like to discuss a separation agreement that protects your future opportunities and compensates you appropriately for the harm done. Most people imagine moments like this as victories, cinematic scenes where you stand, slam your fists on the table, and declare justice served. But real moments like this are quieter, more deliberate. The room felt insulated from the world outside, the air thick with professionalism and consequences. They presented the offer: 2 months of severance, payment for all unused vacation, 3 months of extended health care, a strictly neutral reference, no mention of a PIP, no negative remarks, a statement that my separation was not performance-related, a clause preventing Mark or the HR partner from ever commenting on my employment again, and finally a written acknowledgement, internal but binding, that the actions taken against me were inappropriate. I read through the pages slowly, line by line, no rush. My hands stayed steady. My breathing never wavered. When I finished, I asked 2 questions. They answered both without hesitation. That alone told me everything I needed to know about the strength of the case. Then I signed. Not because I was beaten. Not because I wanted an easy exit. But because the agreement wasn't a surrender. It was a boundary. A line drawn cleanly between who I had been at that company and who I refused to be anymore. When the meeting ended, senior HR walked me back to the elevator. She didn't apologize. People at her level rarely do. But she'd paused before the doors opened. "Ethan, for what it's worth, this should not have happened to you." I nodded. I know. I packed my desk that afternoon. A few coworkers came by to say goodbye. A few avoided me entirely. I didn't hold it against them. Offices aren't families, no matter how often companies pretend they are. People protect themselves. I was learning to do the same. Mark never appeared. HR never sent a message. Their silence told its own story, one I didn't need to hear again. A week later, I signed an offer with a new company. Better pay, better team. A manager who, during the interview, actually listened. When they asked why I was leaving my previous role, I answered honestly but simply, it wasn't the right environment anymore. They didn't pry. They didn't need the details. My work spoke for itself, just like it always had. I remember the first morning at the new job. I sat at my new desk, opened my laptop, and for a moment, my fingers hovered over the keys, waiting for the familiar dread, the tightness in the chest, the sense that someone was watching from behind a curtain I couldn't see. But it didn't come. The air felt lighter. My body felt lighter. In the end, I didn't ruin anyone's life. I didn't sabotage anyone's career. I didn't set anything on fire. I didn't need to. They did that part themselves. All I did was stop letting them write my story for me, and that was enough.